So this is a quick video about using a UAD Avalon preamp flex routed through to an external compressor during tracking. So I know a lot of you will do it post. I like to track with compression, even if it's just a slight amount, just to keep it controlled. So, and of course, going through an external compressor adds that extra body that I don't feel like software compressors have, and oftentimes gets me really close to the sweet spot that I like to be mixing at, where I just need very subtle amounts of EQ once the recording is done. So basically, in order to do that, I don't have a whole wiring diagram set up, but I have my, of course, microphone coming into my first input, and then I have my compressor going into my second input. So basically have them labeled for the microphone, and then of course for the compressor. And so the way you'll do this is called flex routing. So I have my compressor set to be, the input to my compressor is being ran from output 3 of my Apollo. And then the output of my compressor is ran back into my second Unison preamp. I don't typically do much processing after the compressor during the tracking phase, but I mean, the option's there if I want it. I just have it set to the first preamp, or the first input rather, just because it's convenient to have both of these right next to each other. And so then now, in order to route it to the compressor, you got to hit your output and run it to whatever line is feeding your external compressor. All right, so now you see I'm feeding line 3. So with that in mind, I should be able to grab my microphone, check. And now you see that I'm feeding the compressor real time. So one of the big important things to keep in mind when you're recording, similarly like when you're gain staging plugins, I mean, it's no different with hardware, right? So ultimately, my tweaks in my hardware should be basically almost the same exact gain level as my input. So as you can see right now, they're not as high, but I am compressing a fair amount, probably more than what, yeah, I would say that's pretty close right there, about what I would hit in traffic during tracking, anywhere from 3, sometimes 5 if I'm really hitting aggressive, lyrics. But for the most part, I try to keep it around that 3 at a maximum. And then so really, now that I'm seeing, okay, my output isn't the same as my input, what I'm gonna do is basically turn up the output of my compressor. So now I should see, boom, almost exactly the same amount of gain that I'm hitting on the input. Still needs a little bit more, but that's how I tune in my volume levels to make sure that they're consistent. And every compressor is going to be different, but there you go. About right there is what I'm typically seeing. So Tippy Tillman crossed the tightrope. They said he can't think clearly because his head is filled with pipe smoke. Lived his life so fast because he doesn't want to die slow. Came up from the bottom because he held on to them high hopes. Through the narrow gates, being funneled through them wide slopes. That shit don't really work like trying to clean yourself with wide soap. I said wide soap. The actual verse is dry soap. But also, make sure that you're paying attention to your input as well. Tippy Tillman crossed the tightrope. They said he can't think clearly because his head is filled with pipe smoke. Through the narrow gates, being funneled through them wide slopes. So as you see, I'm really spiking at 0, but keeping it, in between, Tippy Tillman crossed the tightrope. They said he can't think clearly because his head is filled with pipe smoke. Really important to hit that. And I know that you see that my compressor's in right now as well, which I'm currently only viewing my input signal, but let's take a look at what that output signal looks like. And I said output signal, but I really meant gain reduction. So Tippy told me cross a tightrope. They said he can't think clearly because his head is filled with pipe smoke through the narrow gates being funneled through them wide slopes. So hitting 3 dB, both on the Avalon. And a lot of times on the Avalon, I'm actually hitting it pretty hard so you can see where, you know, the needle's moving. But really on the Avalon compressor, I typically try to keep it around max 2 dB gain. Just basically capturing the very top peaks. And then I'll do, you know, most of the tighter control. And again, I mean, when I say tight, it's pretty loose relatively. I don't like running it too hot as far as the inputs and the attack and release time goes. Like a nice smooth, pretty much around 10, 11 o'clock ish on the attack, about, you know, similar on the release. However, a lot of times I'll push the release up to the 5 and be hitting, you know, about 3 and 5. I know it's kind of dark, so you can't really see them great. But then that's where I'm typically tracking. And then, you know, depending on the song, the amount of compression that you actually do is going to vary. Rarely do I really hit 8 unless I have a super aggressive lyric that I really want to be like heavily controlled. Otherwise, most of the time, I'm going to just keep it at a 4-to-1 ratio. Again, in the tracking phase, I only want really a small, light amount of compression coming through. So that way it leaves me still a little gain staging room for the mixing phase where I start adding, you know, my more flavorful, you know, additions, you know, air bands, EQs, tone compressors and stuff like that. So but yeah, that's pretty much how I route and take advantage of running through a Unison preamp to emulate a hardware piece of equipment and directly route it through to an external compressor and then right back into the DAW. And I'm sure people will talk about hitting the converters twice, but in this game, there's no rules, people. If it sounds wonderful to you and you're getting the sound that you want, run with it. Don't let anybody hold you back. Okay? Well, please drop any comments, any questions in the comment section below, and I appreciate your time. Peace.